Recently I did a video about some of the rarest events within Stellaris, and soon after its release, you, dear viewer, decided to fill out the comment section with many others that I missed. So I collated all of these, plus some of my own that I didn't think of at the time, or at least till way later, and came up with this list of some of the rarest things in the game. Now for the sake of clarity, I've categorized them in different levels of rarity, from uncommon to WTF, the former being things that you see every 10 or so playthroughs, and the latter being so rare that it's unlikely you'll see it more than once in your entire Stellaris career. Yes, there are events like that. Rare and Legendary, on the other hand, are just to cover the in-between categories, but it should be relatively straightforward. So anyway, let's dive into some of the rarest events within the game, starting off with the Grand Herald. Now, the Grand Herald used to be one of those dig sites / events that used to be so common you couldn't start a game without tripping over it within the first 2 years, which by itself was not the biggest problem in the world. It just meant that you would have a friggin' titan in 2 years into the game, which then subsequently completely crashed your economy, and if you somehow managed to grab it, you would steamroll over the enemy. It's gotten to the point where if I do find it, and when it is pretty rare, I will try to beeline it for it whenever I can, which means that I expend a lot of influence in ways that I don't need to. In this particular case, it spawned over in this particular system because yes, the Grand Herald, for some reason, was nerfed into the ground together with some of the other events from distant stars. Now, what does the Grand Herald actually do? Allow me to illuminate you. In short, it's one of the most powerful ships in the game that you can get extremely early on if you're super lucky. But as I already mentioned, it has been nerfed into the ground in terms of where it appears. If you can't find it early on in the game, make sure you go for it. Make sure you got enough energy in the bank. But overall, rare these days. Very rare. I have not seen one of these in quite some time. Distant Stars added 2 new precursors to the game, one of which was the Baul, and the other is the rather elusive Zroni. Yeah, this is a precursor that doesn't spawn all that often, and every single time that it does spawn, it's usually rather useless to you because it spawns with quite a lot of Zro. So in order to get this to spawn, you need to do a couple of rather specific things, and if you don't know about these, you're going to be running into some trouble. Allow me to illustrate. Now, in order to get the Zroni to spawn, you're going to need to jump through a couple of hoops. And that basically has to do with surveying planets in a very specific way. All the other precursors, whether or not it's the vanilla ones or even the Baul themselves, all have their own triggers that they can spawn in certain planets that they can spawn at. Sometimes they'll spawn at a normal planet, and sometimes they'll spawn at, say, an asteroid. However, the Zroni is rather unique, where it can only really spawn in a proper way on habitable worlds. So if you haven't seen the Zroni in quite some time, it is most likely because your survey ships have been going out there and not focusing on habitable worlds, and therefore not spawning this particular precursor, but spawning something else, which immediately despawns all the other ones, which is obviously rather problematic. Now, in this particular case, I managed to finally get it after re-rolling God knows how many times on this little world, and of course what it does is it essentially gives you a dig site, and it starts generating some Zro nearby as well, which is rather nice. You know, it gives you some resources, which is always nice. Ignore all the mod stuff that I've got enabled here, it is for reasons. Regardless though, this will send you down a path, a merry-go-around path really, to get you the Zro stuff, and essentially setting you up for early access to the Shroud. And if you're playing with Utopia, you will probably fairly interested by that. But yeah, get the Zroni by not surveying systems properly, but going planet by planet and praying that it will trigger. Otherwise, it is never going to happen. Let's say you've gotten yourself into a hypothetical pickle and one of the crises spawned. This by itself is not the end of the world because you can fight them off pretty easily if you know what you're doing. However, there are special factions actually part of these crises. Yes, this is a combined group of rare events. We're talking about the Aberrant, the Vehement, the Cybrex, and the Sentinels. Yes, these are 4 factions that can only spawn as part of these crises. Yes, there are multiple groups for the crises, one of which is, of course, none other than the Vehement. Yes, it is a variation on the Unbidden that spawns when the Unbidden have effectively taken over 15% of the galaxy, and then of course there is the Aberrant as well, who are probably somewhere on the map over here. I believe they're over here. Yeah, there they are. With a slightly different color scheme, but the same idea applies there as well. When another percentage of the galaxy has been eaten, they will spawn with this absolutely gorgeous little, rift in space. But it doesn't end there, because if the contingency, which so ironically has spawned over here, takes over a certain chunk of the galaxy, the Cybrex will spawn with their own little ring world, Cybrex Beta, and on top of that, they'll be super powerful and they'll be super cool because, unlike the contingency, they'll be blue instead of red. There's also the Sentinels who are probably the more complex of the 3. Essentially, if the Praetorian Scourge takes over a certain percentage of the galaxy, they will spawn, and they will essentially be a strike force against the Scourge. They can give you ships. It's a relatively rare thing. I haven't seen it in forever, mainly because these days I only get the Unbidden or Contingency because I deal with AI or with the joys of jump drives way too early. So I never really get the fun that is the Scourge anymore, which is a bit of a shame because I do like them Sentinels. But you rarely see these factions because usually you crush the endgame crisis before you get to that point, and even then they tend to die pretty quickly because the Unbidden variations fight each other, and same goes for the Cybrex. It's a fun time. Pretty rare. Fallen Empire worlds are a prize. They are some of the best worlds that you can capture in the game. You don't need a ring world. All you need is a Fallen Empire world and all of the juicy resources that it brings with it. Things like the Class 4 Singularity that generates 250 energy for free. The Auto Forge that just generates 25 alloys for free. The Sky Dome, which is not all that interesting, but it just generates housing and stuff like that. And a variety of other building as well. Still though, there's only really one place in the game where you can get these, which is on the Fallen Empire worlds. Or is it? Allow me to introduce you to the following screen. A screen that allows you to reverse engineer arcane technologies. Now, by itself, that may not seem too surprising, except that you can get Fallen Empire buildings out of this. And yes, you can get those buildings in those categories, and specifically the Class 4 Singularity building that essentially gives you a quarter of a Dyson swarm of materials, as in energy, for free, is pretty high in the list of things that you really want to get. Now, obviously, this has a little bit of a cooldown, and you're not always going to get the buildings that you would like. Essentially, what it boils down to is that there is a 1% chance that you will get a reverse engineering component, or at least one of the buildings out of it. And even after that point, it's still a question of am I going to get the building that I want? The drop rate for these buildings is so incredibly low, it makes perfect sense, considering how expensive they are, valuable they are at least. So yeah, the Auto Forge, the Sky Dome, the Dimensional Fabricator, the Affluence Center, if you are a standard species, Class 4 Singularity, and the Nourishment Center for all the insane production that you could ever want. And let's be honest here, they can get pretty darn crazy. I would like to point out, however, that in the script files for these particular buildings, that the numbers don't actually add up to 100%. They actually add up to 102%. So you even have less than 1% chance of one of these buildings dropping. And once again, you're not potentially going to get the best one in class, which is, of course, the class for Singularity. The Dimensional Fabricator is also pretty darn nice. And if you're a Fallen Empire, you're even going to get more. Still, though, yeah, if you have the chance and you can get them, make sure you reverse engineer arcane technology as much as you can so that you can get access to these insanely powerful but oh so rare buildings. And considering you can re-roll the dice as many times as you have minor artifacts, the chances of getting one of these is higher than, say, the Galatron. The Technosphere. It has many secrets, some of which involve a giant black hole called Gargantua, and for those of you who are vaguely familiar with literature, you would also know that Gargantua and Pantagruel are the terms that you kinda usually see together, but normally you don't really see Pantagruel all that often because it's a relatively uncommon outcome of the infinity equation storyline. Essentially what can happen here is once you investigate the Technosphere's black hole, there are a multitude of things that can happen. 50% chance, you succeed, you get a bunch of technology out of it. A 25% chance, the Technosphere dives into the black hole, gets crushed or spaghettified, and that is the end of that. But also, there is one outcome, which is referred to in the script files as #SecretAwesomeStuff, at a chance of 25%, that Pantagruel will spawn. Now, Pantagruel is pretty awesome because it gives you 10 of every single science, but that's not the biggest part of it. You will get a plus 10% global bonus to science, which is, at the first glance, not the biggest deal, but on paper, it's actually pretty darn good because a 10% bonus to all of your tech output is pretty amazing. Now we're starting to get to the events that are extremely rare, as well as one that is completely batshit insane. Yeah, the last two on the list are kinda weird, one of which is Wanderlust. Yeah, Wanderlust is a strange one because, let's put it this way, when the game starts, when you're your very first day in the game, it rolls a dice, a 100-sided dice. And when the dice lands, you have the chance of getting an event chain. You have Sunlight Probes, which has a 10% chance of spawning, and essentially what happens is you have to go out, find some probes, one of them has gone rogue, one of them has been stolen by some aliens, etc. Then we have Radical Cult, where you essentially have to fight a cult that is part of your empire, and they are on the go, and you need to kill the shipyard. In the original version of the game, this was the best way to get destroyers with tachyon lances on it by year 15. No, I'm not kidding. And we've got Mass Extinction. Mass Extinction essentially is an event chain where you scan some planets and you get a bunch of resources at the end. Very exciting stuff. It doesn't replace the Livable Planets event. It's just a little add-on. There's a 69% nice chance that nothing happens, but there's also a 1% chance at the start of every single one of your games that you get the Wanderlust event. Now, Wanderlust is rather curious, because essentially, at some point within the game, one of your scientists will slip away into the wild yonder, and will go places that nobody has ever even imagined before. Essentially, they hide out in the Shroud for a little bit, and then comes out. And what happens next is that there is a small percent chance extra that the Unbidden will spawn in the late game. You don't get a lot out of it, but Wanderlust is one of those events that is extremely rare and increases the chance that the Unbidden spawns, which is not all that great, but it's pretty much on par with, say, the Crystal Enclave, which also has a 1% chance of spawning, which is pretty crazy to begin with. Yeah, extremely rare, legendary almost. Almost impossible to get unless you re-roll your game many, many times. If you see it, just get ready for some Unbidden on your doorstep, because they're coming, and they saw your scientist floating around in the Shroud. They know you're there. Time to be afraid. let's talk about the rarest event in the game. An event so incredibly difficult to get that it's unlikely that even in 1,000 hours of regular playtime that you will get it. Sure, you can boost your chances of getting it ever so slightly by getting the correct type of habitable planet, which in this particular case is the desert world. But then again, whoever starts off in a desert world, and essentially what you'll need is a very particular anomaly that has a 1% chance of generating the Towel event. Yes, the Towel event. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy Easter egg event that essentially gives you one of the best traits for a scientist within the game itself. It is actually completely insane. And on top of that, it is just beyond ridiculously rare to get. Because first of all, you will need to find yourself a desert planet, roll the dice in such a way that you are going to get the anomaly that you need. Then when you have the anomaly, get once again a dice roll of a D100 and roll a perfect one to get the event. It's completely insane. It is WTF territory at how rare the Toweled event is. It is just completely ridiculous. But then again, in the end, it's okay. It's important to know that you should not panic and say goodbye and thanks for all the fish, because, as I mentioned, this event is so unlikely for you to get that, well, if you've gotten it, put it down in the comments below, because I don't believe you, because I haven't had it myself, and I've played this game for over 4,500 hours. It's that rare. I'm not even kidding. Like, if you've gotten this, I guess you never should buy any lottery tickets ever again, because you've wasted all your luck on this one. You've peaked. This is where it's at. And there you have it, 7 more of the rarest events within Stellaris. Is any of the ones that you think are super rare in this list, or even in the previous video? And if you haven't checked that one out yet, feel free to click on the link that will be popping up on your screen shortly. Then let me know down below, because I am super curious, and these videos are super fun to make, because rare things are always fun to find, even if they're just Easter eggs in the end. So yeah. Right down below, were these rare enough for you? Or do you think if there's even something better out there? We will see, though. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you so much for watching. I thank you to my patrons for making this video possible today, and also to you, dear viewer. Feel free to subscribe if you want to see more. But in the meantime, though, we're going to go and wrap this video up here. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, take good care of yourselves, and make sure that you find some of those rare events, because they can be pretty powerful.